The phone rings at 3 a.m. It's a private number only his family knows. But when the ruthless head of the city's largest crime syndicate answers, it isn't his little girl on the line. It's a terrified diner, Waitress, standing over his daughter's unconscious body in a freezing alleyway. The neon sign outside Mickey's all-night diner buzzed with a relentless, annoying hum flickering over the wet asphalt of 4th Street. It was 2:45 a.m. on a miserable Tuesday in late November. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the gritty streets of South Boston into a freezing, reflective mirror. Cecilia Jenkins leaned against the worn Formica counter, a damp rag in her hand, staring blankly out the window. At 26, Cecilia was entirely accustomed to the night shift. She knew the rhythm of the city's underbelly, the exhausted truck drivers, the insomniacs, the drunks stumbling in after last call. Tonight, the diner was dead. The only patron was a regular, an old man named Arthur, who was nursing a black coffee in the corner booth. "I'm gonna take the trash out, Arthur. Keep an eye on the register," Cecilia called out, her voice flat. Arthur just grunted, not looking up from his newspaper. Cecilia grabbed the heavy black trash bags from the kitchen. As she pushed open the heavy steel back door, the freezing wind hit her like a physical blow. The alleyway behind Mickey's was a narrow, dark corridor that smelled perpetually of old grease and wet brick. She tossed the first bag into the rusted dumpster. As she swung the second bag up, something caught her eye. Tucked into the narrow, shadowed alcove between the dumpster and the brick wall was a pile of rags. No, not rags. Cecilia squinted through the driving rain. A tiny, pale hand was protruding from a soaked, oversized woolen blanket. Cecilia's heart skipped a beat. She dropped the trash bag and rushed over, falling to her knees in the freezing puddles. It was a little girl. She looked no older than 6 or 7. She was wearing a velvet party dress that was completely soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her pale forehead. Her lips were a terrifying shade of blue. "Hey, sweetie," Cecilia gasped, gently shaking the girl's shoulder. "Hey, wake up. You can't sleep here." The child didn't respond. Her breathing was incredibly shallow, almost imperceptible. Cecilia felt a surge of pure panic. She stripped off her own denim jacket and wrapped it around the girl, pulling her close to share her body heat. As she lifted the child, a heavy, cold object slipped from the folds of the girl's wet dress and clattered onto the pavement. It was a phone. Not a typical child's toy, but a heavy, encrypted satellite phone, the kind Cecilia had only seen in movies. It was wrapped in a custom leather case. Cecilia fumbled with the device. The screen lit up instantly. There was no passcode. On the display, there was only one contact listed on the home screen, saved in bold red letters. Papa. Emergency only. Cecilia didn't hesitate. She hit the call button, pressing the phone to her ear while clutching the freezing child to her chest. 15 miles away, in a sprawling, heavily fortified estate in Weston, Silas Moretti was wide awake. The mahogany-paneled study was thick with the smell of expensive bourbon and cigar smoke. Silas, the undisputed head of the Moretti crime family, sat behind his desk, staring down his 2 top lieutenants, Thomas and Leo. They were discussing a compromised shipping container down at the docks, a multi-million-dollar headache. Then, Silas's private cell phone rang. The sound made the entire room freeze. Only 3 people in the world had that number: his elderly mother, his private fixer, and his 7-year-old daughter, Sophia. Sophia was supposed to be sound asleep upstairs in her heavily guarded wing of the mansion. Silas snatched the phone off the desk. "Sophia? Hello?" A woman's voice answered. It was shaking, breathless, and punctuated by the sound of heavy rain. Are you this little girl's father?" Silas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Thomas and Leo instantly reached for their holstered weapons, reading the sudden, lethal shift in their boss's demeanor. "Who is this?" Silas demanded, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "If you have touched my daughter, I will tear your lungs out." I didn't touch her. I found her," Cecilia yelled back, panic edging into anger. "I'm a waitress at Mickey's Diner on 4th Street. She was dumped by the trash cans. She's unconscious, she's freezing, and her lips are blue. I'm calling an ambulance right now. Do not call the police." "Do not call an ambulance," Silas barked, the command ringing with absolute authority. His mind was racing, calculating 1,000 horrifying possibilities. If Sophia was out of the house, his security was breached. If the police or EMTs got involved, his enemies would know she was vulnerable. I have my own medical team. We will be there in exactly 7 minutes. Take her inside. Lock the doors. Do not let anyone in. She needs a hospital, you crazy. I am bringing a trauma doctor, Silas interrupted, his voice like cracking ice. Listen to me very carefully. Wrap her in whatever you have. Keep her warm. If she stops breathing, you do CPR. What is your name? Cecilia, she breathed out, terrified by the sheer force of the man's voice. Cecilia, I owe you a debt already. Keep my daughter alive for 7 minutes. Silas hung up. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He looked at Thomas. Someone took Sophia. She's at a diner in Southie. Get the armored SUVs. Call Dr. Harrison. If anyone in this house tries to leave, shoot them in the legs. We have a rat. Cecilia practically kicked the back door of the diner open, carrying the dead weight of the little girl. She laid Sophia down in the center booth, sweeping salt shakers and napkin dispensers onto the floor to make room. Arthur, the old man, finally looked up from his paper. His eyes went wide. Good God, Cecilia. What is that? Lock the front door, Arthur. Flip the closed sign, Cecilia shouted, grabbing a stack of clean towels from the prep station. She began vigorously rubbing the little girl's arms and legs, trying to stimulate blood flow. Sophia remained entirely unresponsive. Her skin was terrifyingly cold. Cecilia checked the girl's pulse again. It was there, but it felt weak and erratic, fluttering like a dying bird beneath her fingertips. Cecilia, we need to call 911, Arthur said, his hands trembling as he locked the deadbolt. Her father is coming. He said he has a doctor, Cecilia said, though doubt was gnawing at her insides. Who tells someone not to call an ambulance for a dying child? What kind of trouble had she just dragged herself into? 6 minutes and 40 seconds later, the diner was bathed in the harsh, blinding glare of headlights. 3 black, heavily armored SUVs hopped the curb, parking illegally right on the sidewalk, blocking the front entrance entirely. Before the vehicles had even fully stopped, the doors flew open. A half-dozen men in dark suits stepped out into the pouring rain. They moved with terrifying precision, fanning out to secure the perimeter. Cecilia watched through the rain-streaked window, her breath catching in her throat. The diner door rattled. Cecilia rushed over and turned the deadbolt. The door was shoved open. Silas Moretti walked in. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place in the greasy diner. His dark eyes swept the room in a fraction of a second, registering Arthur, Cecilia, and then, locking onto the booth, he moved with devastating speed. Sophia, he choked out, the ruthless Mafia boss facade fracturing for a split second as he dropped to his knees beside the booth. He pressed his face against his daughter's cold cheek. Right behind him, a man carrying a massive black trauma kit rushed in. This was Dr. Harrison. He shoved past Cecilia without a word, immediately taking a penlight out and shining it into Sophia's unresponsive eyes. He pressed a stethoscope to her chest, his face grim. Her temperature is dangerously low. Silas, but that's not what knocked her out, Dr. Harrison said rapidly, pulling a syringe and several vials from his bag. Look at her pupils. Pinned, her breathing is suppressed. She hasn't just been exposed to the cold. She's been heavily sedated. Barbiturates, maybe a high-grade tranquilizer. Silas stood up slowly. The air in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. The grief in his eyes was instantly swallowed by a rage so profound it made Cecilia take a step back. Someone drugged her, Silas said, his voice a lethal whisper. Someone bypassed 20 armed guards, walked into her bedroom, drugged my daughter, and dumped her in an alley to die. He turned to Cecilia. For the first time, he really looked at her. She was shivering, soaked in rain and grease, her mascara smeared under her eyes. But she wasn't cowering. You found her, Silas stated. By the dumpster, Cecilia said, forcing her voice to stay steady. She was hidden. If I hadn't taken the trash out early, she would have frozen to death before morning. One of Silas's men, A massive brute named Thomas stepped forward. "Boss, we don't know who this girl is. Could be a setup. The O'Connors might have paid her off to be the one to find the kid and gain our trust." Cecilia's jaw dropped. "Are you out of your mind? I make $12 an hour pouring bad coffee. I don't know who you people are, and I don't care. I saved that little girl's life while you guys were apparently letting someone sneak her out of your own house." Thomas took a menacing step toward her, but Silas held up a single hand. Thomas instantly froze. Silas stared at Cecilia. He looked at her worn-out sneakers, her stained apron, and the fierce, defiant glare in her eyes. He had spent his entire life reading people. He knew liars. He knew assassins. This woman was just a civilian who had stumbled into a nightmare. "She's right," Dr. Harrison interrupted. "I need to give Sophia a counteragent and start an IV, but we cannot move her to a hospital. If whoever did this finds out she survived, they will finish the job. We need to take her back to the safe house." Silas nodded grimly. His mind was connecting the dots. His estate was a fortress. The only people who had access to Sophia's wing were his most trusted inner circle. The hit came from inside his own house. He couldn't trust his lieutenants. He couldn't trust his security detail. At this exact moment, the only person in the world he knew absolutely didn't want his daughter dead was the waitress who had just saved her. "Thomas, prep the car for the doctor and Sophia," Silas ordered. He then turned to Cecilia. "Grab your coat." "Excuse me?" Cecilia asked, blinking in confusion. "You're coming with us," Silas said, unbuttoning his own dry suit jacket and holding it out to her. "I absolutely am not," Cecilia shot back. "I have a shift to finish. And quite frankly, you people terrify me. Take your daughter and go." Silas stepped closer. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. "Cecilia, the people who did this are professionals. By tomorrow morning, they will realize Sophia isn't dead. They will retrace her steps. They will find out she was discovered at this diner. If you are here when they come looking for answers, you will be dead before your shift ends." Cecilia looked at the old man, Arthur, who was huddled in the corner, and then at the little girl, who was now being carefully lifted onto a portable stretcher by Dr. Harrison. "You are the only person outside of my payroll who knows my daughter is alive," Silas continued, his voice softer now, but carrying a heavy, undeniable truth. "You saved her life. Now, I have to save yours. Get in the car." The interior of the armored Mercedes-Maybach S680 was silent, save for the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the harsh, ragged breaths of the little girl lying across the plush leather seats. Cecilia sat rigidly in the corner, her wet clothes clinging to her freezing skin. Silas's oversized suit jacket was draped over her shoulders, smelling faintly of expensive tobacco and cedar. She watched as Dr. Harrison constantly monitored the IV line snaking into Sophia's pale arm, his face illuminated by the clinical blue glow of his medical tablet. Silas sat opposite Cecilia. He hadn't said a word since they left the diner. He was a statue of pure, terrifying focus, his eyes tracking the dark, rain-slicked streets of Boston as if anticipating an ambush at every intersection. The convoy didn't head toward his sprawling Weston estate. Instead, they navigated toward Beacon Hill, pulling into a discreet, heavily fortified underground parking garage beneath a private, unmarked residential high-rise. "We're taking the freight elevator directly to the penthouse," Silas ordered, as the vehicles came to a halt. His men moved with military precision, forming a human shield around the doctor as he carried Sophia out of the car. Cecilia hesitated at the edge of the vehicle. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. She was a diner waitress who was 3 months behind on rent. And now she was stepping into the hidden, opulent fortress of a crime lord. Silas paused, looking back at her. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the garage cast deep shadows over his sharp jawline. "I told you I would keep you safe, Cecilia. I do not break my word." She swallowed hard, nodding once, and stepped out to follow him. The penthouse was a masterclass in cold, modern, luxury floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows overlooking the Charles River, Italian marble floors, and an imposing silence that felt completely disconnected from the chaotic city below. Dr. Harrison immediately commandeered a sprawling guest bedroom, turning it into a makeshift intensive care unit. For 2 agonizing hours, Cecilia paced the living room. Silas was in the adjacent study. The door cracked open just enough for Cecilia to hear his low, lethal voice issuing commands on encrypted lines. He was hunting. He was locking down his assets, freezing bank accounts at Coates, and interrogating his security chiefs. Finally, the bedroom door opened. Dr. Harrison stepped out, looking exhausted but visibly relieved. She's awake. The counteragent worked. The barbiturates are flushing from her system. She's weak, and she's frightened, but there is no permanent neurological damage. Silas emerged from the study, the tension instantly bleeding out of his broad shoulders. He bypassed the doctor entirely and walked into the bedroom. Cecilia hovered by the doorway, unsure of her place. Sophia was propped up against a mountain of white pillows. She looked incredibly tiny. When she saw her father, tears instantly spilled over her eyelashes. "Papa," she whimpered. Silas sat on the edge of the mattress, gathering the little girl into his arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man of his violent reputation. He buried his face in her dark hair, his voice cracking as he whispered in rapid, soothing Italian. Cecilia felt a lump form in her throat. She turned to leave, wanting to give them privacy, but a small voice stopped her. "Is that her?" Sophia asked, her voice raspy. She was pointing a trembling finger at Cecilia. Silas pulled back, looking from his daughter to Cecilia. "Yes, little bird. That is Cecilia. She found you. She brought you back to me." Cecilia offered a tentative, warm smile, stepping into the room. "Hi, Sophia. You gave me quite a scare tonight." Sophia reached out, her small fingers wrapping around Cecilia's wrist. "You were warm. In the rain. I remember you holding me. I wasn't going to leave you," Cecilia said softly. Silas's eyes locked onto Cecilia's, and for a fraction of a second, the invisible wall of ice around the mob boss melted completely. It was a look of profound, unadulterated gratitude. But the moment was shattered when Sophia's expression darkened with sudden, terrifying memory. "Papa," Sophia whispered, her grip tightening on Cecilia's arm. "The monster who took me from my bed. He didn't have a face. He wore a black mask. But I know who it was." Silas froze. The room dropped 10 degrees. "Who, Sophia? Who was in your room?" "He told me it was a game. He told me to drink the special juice," she cried, burying her face in Silas's chest. "But when he reached out to give me the cup, I smelled his cologne. It smelled like the burnt wood and pineapples, and I saw his watch, the heavy gold one with the moon on it." Cecilia frowned, confused by the description, but Silas went perfectly, terrifyingly still. The scent of Creed Aventis. A custom, solid gold, Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch. There was only one man in Silas's entire syndicate who wore that specific, ostentatious combination. The man who had been sitting in his study just hours ago, urging him to blame a rival family. The man who had been his right hand for a decade. "Thomas." "Dr. Harrison," Silas said, his voice stripped of all emotion. It was the voice of an executioner. "Stay in this room. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." He stood up, his eyes meeting Cecilia's. "Stay with her." Before Cecilia could speak, Silas turned and strode out of the room, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him. The penthouse living room was bathed in the dim, gray light of the approaching dawn. Silas stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the Boston skyline. He had made a single phone call to his security detail downstairs. 5 minutes later, the private elevator chimed. Thomas stepped out, his massive frame filling the entryway. He looked confident, swaggering slightly, completely unaware that he had just walked into his own graveyard. "Boss," Thomas said, running a hand through his slicked-back hair. "I got the perimeter secured. The O'Connors are quiet, but I got guys watching their clubs. How's the kid?" Silas didn't turn around. "She's awake." Thomas paused. A micro-expression of panic flashed across his heavy features, quickly masked by a forced smile. "That's a miracle, Silas. Thank God. Did she see who took her?" Silas slowly turned to face his lieutenant. He casually unbuttoned his suit jacket. "She didn't see his face, Thomas. The coward wore a mask to kidnap a 7-year-old girl." "Smart," Thomas muttered, stepping further into the room. "These cartel guys, they know how to operate." "But she smelled his cologne," Silas interrupted. his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Burnt wood and pineapple. And she saw his watch. A gold Patek with a moon phase. The silence in the penthouse became absolute. The air grew so thick and heavy it felt hard to breathe. Thomas looked down at his own left wrist, where the gold Patek Philippe gleamed under the recessed lighting. His hand instinctively twitched toward the concealed holster beneath his jacket. He never made it. Silas moved with a speed that defied his size. In one fluid, brutal motion, he closed the distance, his hand snapping out to grip Thomas by the throat, slamming the larger man backward against the marble wall with a sickening crack. Thomas gasped, his hands clawing uselessly at Silas's iron grip. You sold my daughter to the O'Connors, Silas snarled, his face inches from his traitorous lieutenant. For what? A larger territory? A seat at their table? Silas. Wait, Thomas choked out, his face turning a mottled purple. They were going to hit you. I was trying to negotiate. She was just leverage. She is my life, Silas roared, the primal sound echoing off the high ceilings. Suddenly, the bedroom door clicked open. Cecilia, hearing the commotion, had stepped out, terrified by the shouting. Thomas's eyes darted to Cecilia. Driven by the desperate adrenaline of a dying man, he managed to kick his knee upward, catching Silas in the ribs. Silas stumbled back just enough for Thomas to draw his weapon. But he didn't aim at Silas. He leveled the heavy barrel directly at Cecilia's chest. Back off, Silas! Thomas screamed, gasping for air, the gun trembling in his hand. Let me walk to the elevator, or I put a bullet in the waitress. Cecilia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She stared down the dark barrel of the gun, her mind going completely blank. This was it. This was where her late-night shift ended. Silas didn't panic. He didn't raise his hands. His eyes remained locked on Thomas, cold and calculating. You have always been stupid, Thomas, Silas said softly. You think holding a gun on the woman who saved my daughter gives you leverage? It just signs your death warrant twice. Before Thomas could process the words, Silas's hand blurred to the small of his back. A suppressed gunshot, a sharp thwip cut through the room. Thomas's eyes widened in shock. A dark red stain bloomed instantly in the center of his forehead. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering harmlessly to the marble floor, a second before his massive body collapsed in a lifeless heap. Cecilia clamped a hand over her mouth, a stifled scream escaping her lips as she backed away, her legs hitting the edge of the sofa. She was shaking violently, tears blurring her vision. Silas holstered his weapon and immediately crossed the room, stepping over his former lieutenant's body as if it were nothing but an inconvenient rug. He stopped in front of Cecilia, his hands hovering, unsure if he should touch her. Are you hurt? He demanded, his eyes frantically searching her face. He was going to shoot me, Cecilia whispered, the shock rendering her voice hollow. Silas gently gripped her shoulders. His touch was unexpectedly warm and grounding. I would burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone put a hand on you, Cecilia. Do you understand me? You are under my protection now. Cecilia looked up into his dark eyes. She saw the violence there, the ruthless authority of a man who commanded an empire of shadows. But she also saw the desperate, fierce devotion of a father. She saw a man who had just killed to protect her. I can't go back to the diner. Can I? She asked quietly, the reality of her new existence settling over her like a heavy blanket. No, Silas said softly. The O'Connors will know Thomas failed. They will look for loose ends, but they will never find you here. You have a choice, Cecilia. I can give you a new identity, millions of dollars, and send you anywhere in the world. You will never have to worry about rent or late-night shifts again. Cecilia looked past him, toward the cracked bedroom door, where she could see Sophia sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling steadily. And my other choice? Cecilia asked, her gaze returning to the Mafia boss. Silas stepped closer, his thumb gently brushing a stray, damp curl from her cheek. The gesture was intimate, loaded with an unspoken, heavy tension that had been building since she cursed him out on the phone hours ago. You stay. You let me show you that I am more than the violence you saw tonight. You let me protect you, the way you protected her. Cecilia took a deep breath. She had lived her entire life invisible, a ghost pouring coffee in the dead of night. Now, she was the center of the most dangerous man in Boston's universe. It was terrifying. It was madness, and it was exactly where she wanted to be. "I've never liked traveling anyway," Cecilia whispered, a faint, defiant smile touching her lips. Silas's eyes darkened with possessive relief. He pulled her against his chest, shielding her from the sight of the blood on the marble floor, wrapping her entirely in his shadowed, formidable world. The diner was a lifetime ago. The waitress was gone. She was a queen now, standing beside a ruthless king. If this thrilling tale of betrayal, unexpected love, and a father's ruthless devotion kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a gripping story. Share this video with your friends who love mafia, romance, and dark drama. Drop a comment below. Would you have gotten in the car with Silas?